All right, let's get right into it. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine you find a winning lottery ticket. And we're not talking a few bucks. This is a multi-billion-dollar winner. It's real, it's verified, that money is yours. But then you read the fine print, and you discover that for some crazy reason, the cost to actually get to the lottery office and cash that ticket in is more than the prize money itself. So what do? Well, this isn't just a weird thought experiment. It's the exact paradox facing one of the biggest oil discoveries of the last decade, in a place called Brazil's Equatorial Margin. And to wrap our heads around this, we're diving into a fascinating analysis from April 2026 by Sergio Wasserstein. Now, what's really wild about this piece is its conclusion, that up to 60%, 60, of this enormous multi-billion-barrel oil discovery might just be left in the ground. Forever. So, to understand why, we first have to accept that the old rulebook for finding and selling energy, it's been torn up. The game has totally changed. You know, for the past 100 years, all that mattered was something called geological efficiency. The questions were simple. Is there oil down there? And do we have the tech to get it out? If you could say yes to both, you were golden. But today, a new and frankly, a much more brutal logic has taken over: temporal legitimacy. And here's the absolute key takeaway. Temporal legitimacy isn't about where the oil is. It's all about when it shows up. If your project's timeline means its best production years land in an era where global demand is falling, well, that physical oil you found is basically worthless on paper. The clock is now your biggest enemy. And for Brazil's Equatorial Margin, this is the whole story. The project has this really rigid, decade-long development timeline, and it's putting it on a direct collision course with the future of energy. Let's just walk through it. From 2026 to 2028, you're looking at 2 years just of environmental licensing and paperwork, mainly because it's so close to the mouth of the Amazon. Then from 2028 to 2032, that's 4 solid years of just burning through cash. We're talking billions to build these giant floating production ships. Oil doesn't even start flowing until after 2032, and you won't hit peak production until 2035 at the very earliest. And this chart just lays the problem out perfectly. The golden window for this project, the period where it makes its money back and really starts generating profit, it doesn't even begin until 2035, and it stretches into the early 2040s. So this isn't a bet on today's market, it's a massive all-in bet on what the world looks like a decade from now. So what does the world of 2035 look like? Well, it's a world where major economies are finally enforcing their toughest climate policies. We're talking about actual bans on new gas-powered cars, huge grid electrification projects, and an energy environment where demand for oil has either flatlined or is actively falling. Now, you might be wondering, why does a small drop in demand matter so much? It's because of how oil prices are set. The global price isn't based on the cheap, easy-to-get stuff from Saudi Arabia. No, it's set by the very last, most expensive barrel needed to meet global demand. That's called the marginal barrel. So when demand falls even a little bit, it's the super expensive, difficult projects, just like the Equatorial Margin, that are the first to get kicked out of the market. And if you think this is all just speculation, we don't have to guess. We have a perfect real-world case study of a country that totally mastered this idea of temporal legitimacy and won big time. We need to talk about the Guyana effect. Just look at this side by side. While Brazil is staring down a 10-year timeline, Guyana went from discovery to pumping oil in less than 5 years. How'd they do it? They optimized for one thing: speed. They used standardized, almost copy-paste production ships instead of waiting for custom-built ones. Their entire logic was get the oil out before the world changes. And that's why Wasserstein uses this brilliant metaphor, a Guyana map upside down. It's got nothing to do with geography. It's about time. It's a temporal inversion. Guyana timed it perfectly to hit the peak of the expansion cycle when the door was wide open. Brazil, on the other hand, is slowly walking towards a door that is already being locked. And all of this leads us to the final and kind of devastating verdict. What happens when a multi-billion-dollar project gets caught in this temporal trap? It becomes what's known as a stranded asset. The analysis estimates that a staggering 40 to 60% of the oil in the Equatorial Margin might become exactly that, stranded, an asset that exists on a piece of paper but can never, ever be turned into actual cash. This forces us to really redefine what an oil reserve even is. See, a proven reserve just means the oil is physically down there. But a monetizable reserve, which is the only kind that investors actually care about, is oil that you can sell at a profit inside that shrinking market window. For the equatorial margin, those two numbers are becoming drastically different. So why is this specific oil field getting hit so hard? Well, it's suffering from a perfect storm of three compounding problems. First, it's a new, unproven frontier, so it needs super expensive safety measures. Second, its extraction costs are just sky high, so it can't even compete with Brazil's own cheaper oil fields. And third, the environmental risk of drilling near the Amazon, well, that carries a liability that's just astronomical. And this is so critical to understand. There's no global inspector who's going to fly out and put a padlock on the oil well. The thing that strands this asset is simply the invisible hand of the market. It's not that they won't be allowed to pump it, it's that eventually the cost of the shovel becomes more than the value of the treasure you're digging up. The analysis calls it a perfect economic vice grip. On one side, you have price risk from things like electric vehicles pushing your potential revenue down. At the exact same time, you have regulatory risk and capital risk, things like ESG rules that make it way harder to get loans, and they are pushing your costs up. When those two lines cross, the project is effectively dead. And this leaves us with one final and pretty profound question to think about. If a company or a country knows that their multi-billion-dollar asset has an expiration date, that half of it could be worthless in a decade, how does that change the way they act right now? Does knowing the clock is ticking make them more cautious and careful? Or does it create this perverse incentive to rush, to cut corners, and to get as much out of the ground as humanly possible before that window slams shut for good?